Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're continuing the Ben Ashri. We're in Parshat Naso. As we say every share, the learning that we're doing should be Luli Nishmas, the Tzaddik Miranana, Rav Yitzchak HaKohen, Mer Asher Anshel, Hoberman, the great Tzaddik from Ranana, who we learn from the Sefer Midei Shavua every week, and we're hoping that we should be able to be Zoicha to make Nachas Ruach to the Ben Ashri and to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that it should be Schus for his Neshama, and that he should keep the promise that he said that those that learn from his Sefer and repeat over Divrei Torah in his name, he'll be a male tzarech of them. In this piece that we're going to learn an unbelievable Ben Ashri. I don't know if there's a Ben Ashri like this throughout his Sefer, and the Ben Ashri has many interesting chidushim, beautiful chidushim. Many of them are classics. This one is an amazing chiddush, amazing piece, how he synthesized and he brings out the current events in his days and he fits it into the psukim, which means he takes the psukim and says, okay, now we can explain the psukim based on what's going on in the world in real time. Now, just as a little bit of a background, the Ben Ashri at this point approximately was in Eretz Yisrael, sometimes between the 50s and the 70s. Between those 20-year periods, he was living in Eretz Yisrael already. Could be a little bit before already he got to Eretz Yisrael, and he's going to touch up what's going on in the world, specifically in Klal Yisrael, how it fits into these two psukim. Now, we're not going to learn the first paragraph. We're going to say it outside, and we're going to bring two important introductions that the Ben Ashri brings. The Ben Ashri says on the first pasuk in this week's parasha, Naso is Rosh Bnei Gershon, Gam Heim Lebeis Avoisam Lemishpachoisam, three beautiful kashas. These are kashas that all the Rishonim ask. Then number one, the word Gam Heim is extra. Right? What do I have to say? Also Bnei Gershon. Now, just to remind ourselves, on last week's parasha, the end of the Parshat Bamidbar discussed Bnei Kahas. This week's parasha discusses Gershon and Merari. Now, there's another question that all the Mepharshim also asked. Now, in this piece, that really Gershon was Bachar, how come he's second? But question number one, why does it say Gam Heim? Question number two, how come the order of the pasuk is different? Here it says by Gershon, Lebeis Avoisam, to his father's house, Lemishpachoisam, to the family. If you look at the psukim by Kahas and Merari, it's the other way around. First Mishpachoisam, and then Avoisam. And the third shaila is why does it say over here by Gershon and by Kahas the word Nasoi, where it does not say by Merari? So there's three diyukim that the Ben Ashri quotes all the Mefarshim where the pasuk seems to be out of order or extra words, and how does that impact, and what is it coming to teach us? So the Ben Ashri teaches us two yisoides, one in the name of the Rashbam and the other one in the name of the Chasam Sofer. The Rashbam writes down in Vayikra in Vayeshev, that he told his grandfather Rashi, right? Rashi was a grandfather of the Rashbam, that there's an Indian to be mechadish the Torah to what's going on in the world. Be mechadish in the Torah the Psukim, right? What's happening in real time. And he says that Rashi praised it. Rashi liked that and said that's correct. And therefore, the Ben Ashri is going to take these Psukim, specifically of Bnei Gershon, and tie it into what's happening in the world in his days, in the 60s and 70s. In addition, in order to do that, the Chasam Sofer teaches us that when it says Lebeis Avoisam, refers to Eretz Yisrael, and when it says Lemishpachoisam, it refers to Avos HaKadoshim, Ayin Sham, why exactly that's what it means. Now we're going to learn inside. It's in page Yud Zayin. Dehine Hayom, today, says the Ben Ashri, Nimtzam Gimel Dargus V'Yisrael. There are three levels in Klal Yisrael. Aleph, number one, Hadorim Eretz Yisrael, those that are living in Eretz Yisrael. Beis, Anshe Chutz L'Eretz, those that live outside of Eretz Yisrael. Hayoshvim Shalvim V'Shketim B'Artzos Hamarav. They're living in peace and quiet in the West, right? Which refers to America, to France, to England, as he's going to quote. The third level is Bnei Yisrael Hayoshvim B'Eretz HaRussia, Russia V'Gerusel, Russia and its satellite countries, V'Chol Medinas Haravim, and all those that are still living in the Arab nations, the Dasa Islam, or those that are connected, the nations have a Muslim majority. Now remember, this is in the 70s, 60s and 70s, where Russia still had the Iron Curtain. it was still the Soviet Union. There were still Jews in Iran. There were many Jews in Iran in the 60s and 70s. There were Jews in Persia still. There were Jews in other places in the world, not as much as they were in the earlier of the 19th century and 20th century, but there were still some Jews. So now, based on this idea, he's going to explain beautifully. Anshe Eretz Yisrael, the people that are living in Eretz Yisrael, Ye'os L'Knoisam, it's correct to give them the title. I don't want to use the word nickname, but the title, B'Shem Kahas. Shemekavtzim Mikol Artis, they gathered together in Eretz Yisrael from all the other worlds, from all the other countries. You will gather the nations. Ubahem Ksiv Lebeis Avoisam. And to them, they're called Lebeis Avoisam. As we mentioned in the Chasim Sofer, that refers to Eretz Yisrael, Kihem Eretz Yisrael. Ba'avir Hatar, in the pure spiritual ear of Eretz Yisrael. Ubeneim, and amongst these people, Harbe Goinim, Ba'alacha, great people in Halacha, V'tzadikim, V'ktusha, V'tara. The Yoshas Shalom in Tarasein HaKdosha, and they're sitting and learning in Tahara HaKdosha. Mechatshim ba'halacha, they're mechadishim halacha, v'hagarato mafitzin me'yonis Taraseinu, and they're spreading out and they're drawing from the wellsprings of HaTorah HaKdosha chutza. And through this, nasim dvekim avsein HaKdoshim, they become attached to our forefathers that lived in Eretz Yisrael beforehand. Shalamdu v'kimu Taraseinu HaKdosha od kodim nesinasa, that they already kept the Torah, referring to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, before the Torah was given. So through the learning Torah today, we connect to all those that learned the Torah beforehand. Befrat, he says, the others. And through the schus of the others, we can connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Our own koich, we cannot connect, we can't be davik to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There's no more Avi, Shetisha Shechina, HaKdosh Shalav. V'lo yitanu you there. Hainu das. Shapir Rashi, Zeh Ruach HaKodesh. We don't really have Ruach HaKodesh. Again, there is levels of Ruach HaKodesh. Koyrim Chazal, Da'avagav the Nestalka, Nevum and Nevim, Mechachon and Nestalka. Ta'idei HaKdushas Toraseinu, Shoyalem Ruach HaKodesh, Ta'idei Zeh, Hadvekus Bavaseinu, through being Dovik, through our forefathers, through the Torah, HaKdoshim, Shiachom, Amitim, they were the highest level of tzaddikim. So the word lebeis avoisam, the reason that it says first, because it refers to the highest level of Jews which live in Eretz Yisrael. Why are they the highest level of Yidden? Because they live in Eretz Yisrael, right? Ein Torah Ketaris Eretz Yisrael. There's kedushas of Eretz Yisrael. There's great tzaddikim, and it's much easier for those that live in Eretz Yisrael to connect to the avos and through that be able to davak to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The second category of Jews, Yehudim Artzos Abris in America, B'Ma'ariv Europe in the Western Europe, Anglia, England, Tsarfas, France, V'Acherim and other countries, Ruim L'Kanoisam Gershon. It's proper to call them Gershon. Ki Etzlam Yesh Gam Kein Harbe Yeshivas. They also have a lot of yeshivas in the West. Rabbanim Gonim Tzadikim V'Chasidim. The Kama Palmim, many times these Tzadikim Ba'im Levak B'Eretz Yisrael. V'Ritzonim L'Siyashish Shab. And they really want to live in Eretz Yisrael. The Elu she'enum oil b'yadam, and those that can't move to Eretz Yisrael, the siman shakadosh baruch hu yesh le'od chefetz v'ratzon she'yeh b'chutz la'aretz. Ben Lashi says the fact that certain tzaddikim who want to come to Eretz Yisrael don't come to Eretz Yisrael or can't come to Eretz Yisrael, it's because Hashem still wants them and needs them in chutz la'aretz for whatever reason there is, especially the following reason: V'hem toimichim ba'yeshivas, through them they're able to support the yeshivas in Eretz Yisrael, u'b'klal ha'yishuv, and in general the yishuv. In the 50s and 60s and 70s, Eretz Yisrael was called the Yishuv because it wasn't really fully developed yet. Especially those that work and have connections in the government. Lahamlitz al Yisrael, to be melitz on Klal Yisrael. Today, fortunately and unfortunately, we see how important that is, that we need to have people that defend us in governments, especially in Europe. To save what they can, right? They go into the breach, so to speak, to save what they can, and to support as much as possible. Through that, they also go through the derech of the Ovis HaKdoshim. The Manashe Yitzav Hashem is born of his Beisai Akrab V'Shamru Derech Hashem Lasos Tzedakah Kikol Avaydasum Hayu B'Shilenu. All their avoids was for us. Ka'arim Chazal Yodu Avram V'Soil Mitzrayim V'Godur Atzman Ha'erva, that Avram and Sarah went into Mitzrayim and protected themselves from arayis from erva, b'schusam, and through that kol b'nei Yisrael u'mas avisin labanim. Whatever they did for the benefit of Klal Yisrael. One of the main areas that Avraham Avinu worked on to benefit Klal Yisrael was in Mitzrayim, which is Chutz La'aretz, which is like the Yidden who live in Eretz Chutz La'aretz, do what they can to help the people in Eretz Yisrael. And the fact that they are mishtadel for the benefit of all the yeshivas, the kollel that are learning in Eretz Yisrael, because there's no Torah like Torah of Eretz Yisrael, the Tzimich Eretz Yisrael, and they also helped Eretz Yisrael, Zulas Tviyasim and Mishal Love Eretz Yisrael, through them helping, forcing governments to help Eretz Yisrael, but at least the governments warn the Arabs not to bother Eretz Yisrael, not to attack. And we could also call them Beis Avosim through to connect to Eretz Yisraal, like they Tmichas Beretz Yisrael, the Ruach, the Geshem, right? Al Kain, therefore says the Ben Ashri, Gamheim. The word Gamheim beautifully is referring to those Yidden who live in Chutz La'aretz. They also are part of the high upper category of Klal Yisrael. So we see from here the Ben Ashri is explaining that the psukim refer to the Yidden in Eretz Yisrael. They are obviously connected to the others. Gamheim, also the Yidden that are living in Chutz La'aretz, they are also connected to the others through their hishtadlus of working in the government or lobbying government officials to help Eretz Yisrael, befrat the yeshivas, and most importantly, being toimich in the yeshivas in Eretz Yisrael, supporting the Eretz Yisrael in monetary things. That also connects them to the avos, and they're also considered ki yoshvei arts. There's a big chiddush that the Ben Ashri teaches us, that people that do whatever they can to support Eretz Yisrael in any way possible, they're also considered yoshvei Eretz Yisrael. There's a lot of nafkaminas for that. Now is not the time for it. Achadroga hagimel, the third level of Jews, hey b'nei Merari. They are b'nei Merari. We can call the Yidden that are suffering in the bitterness of Russia, Russia, the evil Russia, Vanilvim, Aleim, those that rely on Russia, Umadinas, Haravim, Islam, and in the Arab countries, Shisham, Ein Noiselem, Shum, Efshal, Lishma, Ladas. In Russia specifically, and a lot of their satellite countries, it was impossible to practice Judaism, especially up until the 80s. In the 80s, it lightened up a little bit after the refuseniks, after some of the Jews left Russia. It was a little bit easier to leave Russia, but up until that point, it was impossible, and befrat, a person's life was on the line if they served any religion, especially Yiddishkeit. Befrat lilmoiter saying Tosha, and specifically, it was impossible to learn Torah. I'm sorry, it was very difficult to find Sidurim. Tefillah, there's a famous story with the Ribnitzer Rebbe, how the Lubavitch Rebbe used to send them Sfarim and Sidurim in the toughest of times. And how can you teach the next generation if you don't have Jewish stuff? Without Tashmish Kedusha, you can't be Mechanech. They are crushed, they are embarrassed, they don't even have Parnasa, and it's obvious without any doubt they are referring to Bnei Merari. Hashem says, I am with those that are crushed. They're also davik in the Avos HaKadoshim because HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes to them. And therefore by Bnei Merari it does not have to say Nasai. On the contrary, in some ways Bnei Merari is even on a higher level than Kahas and Gershon. Because by Kahas and Gershon it says Nasai, Hashem raised them. But by Merari it doesn't say Nasai. Why? Because since they are so degraded, they are mavuyas, they are embarrassed, they are crushed, Hashem comes to them, and therefore they don't need to be raised. And the last line to me is important, right? And through that he davens that they should also be zeicha to come to Eretz Yisrael. Sheyavai Mashiach Tzidkenu v'Yagal Esam v'Yivin L'Eretz Yisrael Tekev Meir Remain. In his days, it was a dream, it was a cholam for Jews to leave Russia, to leave certain parts of the Arab world, and to come to Eretz Yisrael. It was something that you couldn't even imagine. And if only they would see today, at Klal Yisrael, many Jews left the Iron Curtain. They came to Eretz Yisrael, they came to America, and hopefully that their Yiddishkeit was renewed. The Ben Ashri Mamish takes this piece of the Psukim and ties it to what was happening in his days. So just to summarize quickly, there are three categories of Klal Yisrael. The first category is those that learn Torah. They're directly connected to the Beis Avosam, to our fathers. The second category is the Jews that live in Chutz La'aretz, through their supporting of the state of Israel, and most importantly, the Yishuv, the settlers, the Torah, the Yeshivas, the Koilulim. They have a direct connection to Avraham Avinu, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and they're also considered Beis Avosam. They're also Gam Heim. Them two are also considered, part of Eretz Yisrael. The last category of Jews are those that live in Russia and in the terrible countries that Russia is associated with. They are called B'nai Merari. And even though by them it doesn't say Naso, on the contrary, in some ways they're on a higher level because Hashem comes to them, as we know, Aniyah as Daka. I come to those that are crushed. So the Shekhinah comes to them, and through the Shekhinah, through HaKadosh Baruch Hu's direct involvement in them, they are actually connected to Eretz Yisrael on a much deeper and a much stronger connection. And as he says, Baruch Hashem, this bracha was Makoyim, that we were able to see the people that lived in Russia in his time that under terrible, terrible situations, eventually were able to come home to Eretz Yisrael.